Hey everyone! Tonight we're walking down a damp, gas-lit street somewhere in New 23 Chicago. The air hums with the chatter of streetcars, the distant thump of jazz leaking from a corner speakeasy, and somewhere between it all, you hear it. Pfft! Someone just spat on the ground. If you're lucky, that tiny act won't get you a fine, or worse, a public scolding from a uniformed cleanliness officer. But chances are in this city, in this year, you probably won't survive this social crime unscathed. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft background music, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along a cracked sidewalk glistening with a fine layer of rain. The neon signs buzz faintly overhead, painting the world in streaks of red and blue. People pass by, men in flat caps and women with bobbed hair clutching their coats against the night chill. Everyone's trying to mind their manners, at least in theory. But there, in a moment of careless instinct, a man spits. The sound cuts through the city's hum like a needle scratching a record. In this era, spitting wasn't just rude. It was practically a public health emergency. After the horrors of the 1918 flu pandemic, Americans were terrified of germs. Doctors preached that every drop of saliva was a microscopic battlefield. "One man's spit is another man's coffin," a headline once read. You almost laugh. Dark humour travels fast. But the fear was real. A horse-drawn wagon rolls past, its wheels kicking up the smell of mud and manure. The scent mixes with tobacco and dust, a city perfume you can almost taste. You imagine what it must have been like to live here, surrounded by people constantly coughing, sneezing, and yes, spitting. The man who just spit looks around nervously. He knows he's being watched. Somewhere in the crowd, a spit inspector could be lurking. Yes, that was a real thing. You picture them like undercover agents, ready to pounce on offenders for daring to pollute the pavement. They carried little notebooks, took names, and issued tickets that could cost a day's wages. Historians still debate whether this campaign really came from a place of health concern or from America's growing obsession with moral order. Either way, it worked. Cities began posting shiny enamel signs everywhere. "Do not spoil spit, health department." Some even had skulls and crossbones to drive the point home, just in case the word disease wasn't scary enough. You stop under one of those signs. The letters glint under the streetlight, and for a moment, you realise how fragile people's sense of safety must have been. It wasn't just about germs, it was about being seen as civilised. The line between clean and filthy, proper and criminal, was as thin as a droplet of spit. As you keep walking, a patrolman eyes you suspiciously. You nod politely and stuff your hands in your pockets just in case. The world of 1920s America had strict rules for behaviour, and every cough or sniffle could invite judgment. Even in the silence between passing cars, the air feels heavy with expectation. Be good, be clean, be modern. The irony, of course, is that the same people enforcing the rules would later head into smoky jazz bars, drink from unwashed glasses, and dance cheek to cheek with strangers. But right now, none of that matters. You're here, in this shining city of progress and paranoia, where even your spit has consequences. Somewhere, a gramophone starts playing a slow tune, and the wind carries the faint smell of disinfectant from a nearby street cleaner's cart. The city sleeps under its own watchful gaze, hoping the sidewalks will stay spotless, if not morally, then at least hygienically. You take one last glance at the wet pavement and realise how strange it is that something as small as a droplet could tell such a big story about who we are. You wake the next morning to a city that smells faintly of soap and ambition. The cobblestones glisten, as if scrubbed by hand, which, let's be honest, some of them actually were. Posters still flap in the breeze, warning about the dangers of saliva, each one more dramatic than the last. "Germs lurk in every spit," one screams, beside a cartoon of a villainous droplet wearing a top hat and monocle. You can't decide if it's terrifying or adorable. This was America in the 20s. Modern, loud, and absolutely obsessed with being clean. After the trauma of the 1918 influenza pandemic, people weren't just afraid of disease, they were haunted by it. Every cough in a crowded trolley car, every sneeze in a department store, carried invisible terror. Scientists had finally convinced the public that diseases were spread by germs, tiny unseen monsters hiding in bodily fluids, and saliva became the number one suspect. You pass a bakery, the warm scent of bread curling through the morning air, and you overhear two men arguing about tuberculosis. It's not a rare conversation. Everyone talks about it. It was the spitter's disease, and newspapers described it as a lurking killer in every city. The idea that one careless spit could unleash death gave people the same chill modern folks get when someone sneezes in an elevator. Historians still debate whether this public panic was entirely justified. Yes, tuberculosis could spread through droplets, but by the 1920s, sanitation and pasteurization were already improving public health dramatically. Still, fear sells faster than reason, and fear became policy. You turn onto a main street lined with glossy storefronts and banners reading, "Keep our city clean, no spitting." The phrase public hygiene was practically a religion. Reformers preached that cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness, it was patriotism. If you didn't care about germs, you might as well be un-American. A street preacher is giving a sermon to a small crowd, waving a pamphlet like it's the Ten Commandments. "The Lord loves a clean soul and a clean sidewalk," he shouts. You bite back a laugh. Behind him, a boy sweeps dust into neat piles, his broom moving in slow circles, almost hypnotic. Doctors, meanwhile, became the rock stars of this movement. You imagine one of them, slick-haired and confident, lecturing in front of a chalkboard diagramming the trajectory of a spit droplet. He warns the audience that every time someone spits, those droplets can travel 6 feet, which sounds suspiciously familiar to anyone who's lived through 2020. But it wasn't all paranoia. Public health campaigns really did make life safer. Spitting bans were often accompanied by better sanitation, cleaner water and organised waste disposal. Cities that once smelled like open sewers began to look almost respectable. You can feel that ambition buzzing through the air, a belief that America could disinfect its way into modernity. Still, there's something darker lurking beneath the soap bubbles. These rules weren't applied equally. Immigrants, the poor and racial minorities were more likely to be fined or arrested for spitting than wealthy white citizens. Cleanliness was often code for civilized, and civilized meant whatever the dominant class decided. A police officer strolls past, tapping his baton against his leg. He stops to scold a worker chewing tobacco near a lamppost. The man mutters an apology, wiping his chin with a rag, and spits discreetly into the gutter. You catch the officer's glare, the kind that says, "Don't even think about it." The wind shifts, carrying the sharp tang of disinfectant again. It's almost comforting now, like the city itself is trying to convince you that everything is under control, that all its fears can be shrugged away with soap and civic pride. As the sun climbs higher, the city comes alive in a mechanical rhythm. Trolley bells, car horns, the shuffle of polished shoes, the whisper of paper signs, and in between those sounds, silence, because no one dares spit. By midday, the city feels different, tenser, somehow cleaner, and yet suffocatingly aware of itself. You duck into a shaded alley, escaping the heat, and spot a group of people in crisp uniforms handing out pamphlets. "Citizens Against Spitting," the banner reads in bold black letters. You've stumbled right into the front lines of the anti-spitting crusade. A young woman in a cloche hat presses a leaflet into your hand before you can protest. Her smile is sweet, but there's a strange zeal in her eyes. "Do your part to keep America healthy," she says, as if you might drop dead from a sneeze any second. You glance down. The leaflet warns that spitting spreads death, and includes a grim sketch of a skeleton leaning on a lamppost, politely tipping its hat. You can't help but think it's trying a bit too hard. This, you realise, isn't just a public health movement. It's a moral war. Reformers were everywhere in the 1920s. Anti-saloon leagues, clean living associations, and now anti-spitting clubs. Their members were often middle-class women, teachers, churchgoers, civic reformers, determined to lift the public out of its filthy habits. You can almost hear them saying, "If we can't ban booze anymore, at least we can ban spit." A nearby man scoffs, muttering, "What's next? Law against breathing?" You bite back a laugh. It's easy to see both sides. On one hand, the reformers genuinely believed they were saving lives. On the other, they were moralizing something as human as, well, being human. Historians still debate whether these activists were motivated by compassion or control. Many of them were tied to the same progressive movements that pushed for prohibition and women's suffrage. movements that blended social reform with a dash of self-righteousness. They wanted to uplift society, but their version of uplift often meant telling everyone else how to behave. You follow the volunteers as they march to City Hall. A brass band leads them, playing an upbeat tune that feels oddly triumphant for a campaign about mucus. People cheer, wave flags, and chant slogans like, "A clean mouth, a clean city." The energy feels patriotic, almost religious. One woman stands on a soapbox, her voice rising above the noise. "Do not spit upon your brother's grave," she cries, "for every drop of saliva may carry the breath of death." The crowd applauds wildly. You're half convinced she could start a cult. But the movement's passion wasn't all theatrics. Reformers organised school talks, printed posters in multiple languages, and even created travelling exhibits showing germ dangers. Some exhibits included glass jars filled with preserved lungs blackened by a tuberculosis. Kids would scream, adults would faint, and everyone would swear off spitting at least until they forgot about it a week later. And yet, behind the spectacle, something real was happening. Cities were cleaner, people were healthier, and habits began to change. Public spittoons, once as common as street lamps, disappeared. Streets no longer shimmered with brown stains from tobacco juice. You can almost imagine the collective sigh of relief from the cobblestones themselves. Still, you wonder what it must have been like for the average person, told daily that their most basic instincts were dangerous. Maybe that's what reform always feels like, a tug of war between progress and personal freedom. As the sun begins to set, the band packs up, the crowd disperses, and the reformers retreat, leaving behind a city humming with self-conscious cleanliness. A little girl runs past, humming a rhyme she must have learned at school. "Don't spit on the street, don't spread disease, keep your mouth clean if you please." It's catchy, too catchy. You find yourself humming it as you walk away. The city's crusade for cleanliness has worked its way into your head, and maybe into your conscience too. The next day, you wander through downtown, where the city's new pride gleams from every polished window. The old grime is fading, but the obsession with purity only deepens. Metal plaques hang from lampposts. No spitting. By order of the health department. Some are bolted so high you'd need a ladder to break the rule. Others are right at eye level, daring you to look guilty. You pause under one of those signs and can almost hear it whisper, "Go ahead, I dare you." The air smells faintly of disinfectant again. Chlorine mixed with horse manure, a scent that feels both clean and filthy at once. Everywhere you turn, there's a new law or notice. New York City had started it years earlier, passing its anti-spitting ordinance in 1896, but by the mid-20s, the idea had gone national. San Francisco, Detroit, Boston, Chicago, they all followed suit. A single careless expectoration could earn you a $5 fine, the equivalent of nearly a week's rent for some workers. Historians still debate whether these laws were enforced to protect health or just to make the poor more respectable. You start to notice the pattern. Signs mostly appear in working-class districts near factories and boarding houses, rarely in the polished neighbourhoods uptown. The message is clear: disease, like dirt, is something that happens to other people. You step into a streetcar, and sure enough, there's another metal plaque above the driver's head. "Do not spit on the floor." A woman sitting across from you clutches her purse tightly, glaring at a man chewing tobacco. He shifts uncomfortably, pretending to swallow instead of spit. You can tell he's losing that battle. The driver rings the bell sharply, as if to punctuate the city's new rhythm. Clean, efficient, moral. You imagine him rehearsing speeches about hygiene at dinner parties right before lighting up an unfiltered cigarette. The enforcement wasn't just about fines, it was about visibility. Police officers, health inspectors, even Boy Scouts were deputized to watch for spitters. A city like Pittsburgh issued thousands of citations in a single year. The newspapers loved printing the numbers. It made modern life feel safer, measurable. You wander past a courthouse where a row of freshly installed spittoons gleams like trophies of civic virtue. They sit unused, more decoration than function. The mayor himself had ordered them to symbolize progress. In speeches, he declared that the true measure of a city's greatness lies in its cleanliness. You suspect he never walked through the back alleys behind the butcher shops. One of the pamphlets you picked up yesterday flutters out of your pocket and lands on the sidewalk. A kid runs over, picks it up and points to a tiny warning printed at the bottom: "Violators subject to arrest." He whistles low, then says, Guess I'll hold it in next time. You grin. Smart kid. You can't help noticing the subtle comedy of it all. America was still struggling with prohibition, trying to ban booze, jazz, and sin, all while pouring its moral energy into banning spit. It's as if the nation was looking for something small enough to control. Evening comes and you stop in a diner. There's a no spitting sign behind the counter, next to a no credit one. The waitress, polishing glasses, rolls her eyes when you ask if anyone's ever been arrested for it. Only once, she says. Some guy from out of town who didn't see the sign. Poor fella had to mop the floor for an hour to get out of the fine. You imagine it. A man on his knees, scrubbing the tile where his mistake landed, the city's dignity restored one wipe at a time. Outside, the lamps flicker on, the signs gleam, and you realise something. The war on spit isn't really about germs anymore. It's about image, order, and control. Still, there's something oddly satisfying about it. The sidewalks look cleaner, the air feels fresher, and for a brief moment it seems like humanity might actually be able to behave itself. You know better, of course. People always find new ways to make a mess. The day stretches on, and by the time the afternoon heat fades into the golden haze of early evening, you find yourself wandering through the heart of downtown again. The streetcars rattle past, leaving trails of dust and chatter. Somewhere nearby, a man coughs into a handkerchief. Every head turns. The tension in the air could be sliced with a butter knife, and then mopped up by the sanitation department for safety's sake. You follow the sound of commotion toward a corner store where a small crowd has gathered. A wiry man in suspenders stands beside a police officer, his hands waving defensively. "It was just a little spit," he protests. The officer folds his arms, unimpressed. You lean in closer and realise you're witnessing a real anti-spitting arrest. The crowd murmurs, some outraged, some amused. One woman huffs, "Disgusting habit, lock him up." Another man chuckles. Guess the poor guy didn't see the sign. The officer, enjoying the attention, writes something in his little notebook before escorting the offender toward the patrol wagon. The man's boots scrape against the curb, his pride left in the puddle behind him. Historians still debate how seriously these laws were enforced, but newspaper records from the 1920s suggest hundreds, sometimes thousands of arrests in major cities. Of course, the enforcement was uneven. Wealthy businessmen who spit their cigar juice into the street rarely saw a citation. Labourers, immigrants, and anyone who looked rough around the edges were more likely to face fines or a night in the local jail. You can't help smirking at the absurdity, a city teeming with bootleg liquor, underground gambling, and political corruption, yet someone thought the real danger was saliva. Still, that's the paradox of the 1920s. Moral panic dressed up as progress. The arrested man's wife arrives, out of breath, scolding him with the fierceness of a woman who's had enough of her husband's bad luck. "You couldn't just swallow for once, could you?" she snaps. Even the officer laughs. Someone in the crowd jokes, "He should have spit into a savings account." That one gets a few chuckles. Once the patrol wagon rattles away, you notice a small boy pointing to the wet spot on the pavement where the crime occurred. His mother quickly pulls him away, whispering, "Don't look at it, it's dirty." You can't tell if she means the saliva or the shame. Nearby, a reporter scribbles notes in a small pad. Tomorrow's paper will probably feature the headline, "Spit Bandit Nabbed by Hero Cop." Maybe there'll even be a cartoon showing the man as a germ-spewing menace with a villainous moustache. The press loved exaggerating these moments. It sold papers and reinforced the moral message, stay clean, stay decent, or face humiliation. You imagine what it must have felt like for the poor guy sitting in a cell next to drunks and pickpockets, trying to explain that his crime was spitting. The absurdity must have tasted bitter on his tongue. By nightfall, the scene is forgotten. The same corner fills again with laughter, jazz, and cigarette smoke. People lean on lampposts, flirting under the hum of electric light. The no spitting sign gleams above them, a silent guardian of decency. You look at it and think, maybe the real power wasn't in punishment at all. It was in making everyone watch themselves, constantly aware that even a reflex could be a scandal. And that's the real trick, isn't it? You can build laws, but control only works when people start policing themselves. You feel it in your own throat now, a little tickle, that familiar urge to clear it. You resist. You're in the 20s after all, and no one wants to be the next headline. You wander into the echoing marble hall of a public library, where a crowd has gathered to listen to a doctor talk about, of all things, spit. His white coat gleams under the chandelier, his slicked hair immaculate. He gestures dramatically toward a poster showing magnified bacteria, little monsters with tails, swimming across the page like evil tadpoles. This, he declares, tapping to a poster with a pointer, is what lurks in every drop of saliva. One man's spit contains millions of bacilli, each one capable of destroying life. You swear you hear someone gasp. A woman clutches her pearls as though the bacteria might leap off the page. You lean against the wall, amused. The lecture feels more like a stage play than a science class, but this was the mood of the decade. Half progress, half performance. Science was the new religion and the doctors its high priests. The physician launches into a passionate demonstration, pulling out glass slides and a small microscope. He invites a few brave souls to peer through the lens. "See those little shapes," he says. "Those are tubercle bacilli. They live in the saliva of the careless spitter. One cough, one droplet, and you may be breathing in death." You half expect him to pass around a collection plate for disinfectant donations. Historians still debate whether these public health lectures were more educational or theatrical. They were genuine attempts to spread awareness, but the fear they inspired was almost too effective. People began to see germs everywhere, on doorknobs, coins, even in polite conversation. The 1920s were, in some ways, the birth of the modern germaphobe. After the talk, pamphlets are distributed with diagrams showing the arc of infection, illustrations of how far spit can fly when launched from an unguarded mouth. The numbers vary wildly, 6 feet, 10 feet, 12 if you sneeze with enthusiasm. "Keep your droplets to yourself," one caption reads, as if that were the most natural request in the world. Outside, you overhear a young couple whispering about what they've just seen. The man jokes, "Guess I'll have to stop whistling at the girls from now on." The woman giggles and replies, "Only if you promise to wash your mouth first." You chuckle quietly, public health flirting at its finest. By the mid-1920s, this kind of germ science had become pop culture. Magazines printed sensational illustrations of bacteria armies invading lungs. Schoolbooks taught children how to cover their mouths. Soap advertisements promised scientific protection against disease. Science and marketing walked hand in hand down the disinfected streets of America. You pass a billboard showing a man in a fedora smiling confidently with the words, "A gentleman never spits." The irony isn't lost on you. Beneath the clean message lies a class divide, a not-so-subtle hint that good manners and good health belong to those who can afford them. Still, you can't deny the power of the message. Germs, invisible and menacing, gave reformers a perfect villain. It unified a country otherwise divided by jazz, crime and politics. You can picture people whispering over coffee. You hear about Mrs. Duval's cousin caught consumption, probably from someone's spit. As dusk falls, the doctor's voice still rings in your head. The city hums with streetcars and chatter, but beneath it all you sense a quiet paranoia. Every cough earns a side-eye. Every handkerchief is a badge of decency. You pause at a drinking fountain, remembering the poster that warned, "Germs thrive where manners die." You take a sip anyway, defiantly. It's metallic and cold, and for a moment, you imagine a tiny bacterium clinging to the stream, hitching a ride. You smile. Maybe that's the real human story. No matter how many rules we make, nature always finds its way back in. You step into a small parlour that smells faintly of rosewater and starch. Lace curtains filter the afternoon light, and a circle of women sits primly around a table, sipping tea and discussing, believe it or not, spitting. One of them, a teacher with perfect posture, declares, "A lady never spits, not even in private." Another nods gravely. You can't help but think that's one way to keep a secret. In the 1920s, etiquette became the social front line in America's war on bodily functions. Manners manuals, women's magazines, and civic clubs all began preaching the same gospel: civilization is cleanliness. Spitting wasn't just unhygienic, it was uncouth, unsophisticated, downright primitive, and if you were a woman, it was scandalous. You watch the women pass around copies of the Ladies' Home Journal and Good Housekeeping, both featuring articles on modern hygiene for the modern woman. One even includes a cartoon of a flapper recoiling in horror from a man spitting on the street. The caption reads, "No gentleman would risk a lady's health or her respect." It's easy to laugh now, but back then these small shifts in manners had real power. Etiquette gave people, especially women, a way to shape public behaviour, Reformers framed hygiene as part of civic pride and moral duty. If spitting spread disease, then self-control spread virtue. Historians still debate whether this movement truly liberated women or just gave them new rules to follow. But in this parlour, it feels like power. Every polite nod, every raised eyebrow at the mention of tobacco juice carries authority. These women are rewriting the social code, one genteel frown at a time. Outside, men leaned on lampposts, flicking their cigars and muttering about ladies trying to run the city. Some felt their small freedoms being polished right out of existence. After all, what was the point of being a man if you couldn't even spit in peace? You stroll past a barber shop later that evening. Inside, a group of men sits in worn leather chairs, swapping jokes and pretending not to care about the new rules. You hear they're banning breathing next, one says. Only if it smells bad, another shoots back. The barber laughs, spits neatly into the brass spittoon at his feet and mutters, "Let 'em come for me." There's a charm to it, a stubborn masculinity that refuses to evolve. But you notice the spittoon has a lid now, and a little sign taped above it, for barber use only, even rebellions being contained. The truth is, the line between hygiene and identity blurred in the 1920s. Cleanliness became fashion, morality, even class. Being refined meant not just how you looked, but how you acted, how you controlled your body. And in this polite battle of the sexes, women often won, not through force, but through ridicule. You pass a billboard later showing a dapper man holding a handkerchief. The slogan says, "Real men keep it in." You snort softly. Subtlety was not their strong suit. By nightfall, you find yourself back on the street, watching a young couple walk by arm in arm. The man sneezes suddenly, panics, and pulls out a spotless handkerchief. The woman smiles approvingly, squeezing his arm. "You're such a gentleman," she says. He beams, proof that romance can bloom even under the shadow of public health. You can't help but think, somewhere, Miss Manners is smiling too. The air in the saloon hits you like a wall, thick with cigar smoke, spilled beer, and that faint metallic tang of tobacco juice. The pianist in the corner bangs out a ragtime tune, the rhythm bouncing off brass fixtures and laughter. You've stepped straight into the forbidden temple of spit, the 1920s saloon. This is where America's anti-spitting laws met their toughest opponents, men who had built entire rituals around chewing tobacco. They packed it, chewed it, and spat it like punctuation in a long, lazy sentence. For them, spitting wasn't gross, it was punctuation, it was punctuation, it was punctuation. A man at the bar lifts his chin, his cheek bulging like a chipmunk's, and lets loose a perfect amber arc into the brass spittoon by his boots. It lands with a soft ping. He grins at you. "Dead centre," he says proudly. You resist the urge to applaud. By now, the anti-spitting movement had reached deep into the saloon culture. Reformers despised these smoky rooms almost as much as the Prohibition agents did. They called them dens of disease, claiming that the tobacco chewers of America were the true enemy of civilization. Historians still debate whether these campaigns were about germs or class. After all, most of the spitters came from the working class. Factory men, miners, farmers. The elites didn't chew. They smoked filtered cigarettes or kept their vices quiet. To outlaw spitting was, in many ways, to outlaw them. A bartender wipes his hands on a rag and tells you, half laughing, that city inspectors had come by last week demanding he remove all spittoons. "Said they spread tuberculosis. I told him the only disease spreading in here is boredom." The room roars with laughter. Someone raises a glass and toasts, "To the right to expectorate." There's something charmingly defiant about it. You can sense that these men know the world is changing, that the shiny modern age wants them polished and polite. But in this dim light where jazz meets rebellion, they're clinging to their small freedoms. A reformer once wrote that chewing tobacco and spitting are the twin relics of barbarism. You imagine him writing it with a frown, probably while sipping tea and avoiding eye contact with his own reflection. Yet you can't deny he had a point. Spittoons, once as common as chairs, were breeding grounds for germs when left uncleaned. Some saloons had dozens lined along the floor, each one filled with the dark slurry of habit. The smell alone could scare the flu away. You take a seat near the piano. The man beside you, grey-haired and red-eyed, spits into his cup and says, "They think making laws makes us saints. Next thing, they'll fine us for breathing too loud." You grin and reply, "Give it a decade." Outside, posters warn against spitting, but inside, life goes on unchanged. Men talk about baseball, politics, and the women they aren't supposed to meet after midnight. The band strikes up a faster tune, and the floor shakes with rhythm. You realise that in a place like this, reform doesn't stand a chance. Still, you can feel history pressing in. The younger men smoke cigarettes now instead of chewing, and they spit less often. The culture is shifting one puff of smoke at a time. Soon, even this stubborn ritual will fade, swallowed by modern etiquette. You tip your hat to the bartender as you leave. Behind you, the sound of laughter fades into the street's cool night. Somewhere nearby, a sign glows faintly under a gas lamp. No spitting. By order of the city. You smile, for now the saloon holds out. But the age of spittoons is dying, one brass bowl at a time. Morning sunlight streams through the schoolhouse windows, catching chalk dust as it drifts lazily in the air. The room smells faintly of varnish and soap, a perfect picture of discipline and disinfectant. You take a seat in the back just in time for the teacher to announce today's lesson. Personal hygiene and the dangers of spitting. You glance at the blackboard. Written in neat cursive are the words, "Don't spit, keep fit." Beneath it, a crude drawing of a germ with angry eyes. The children giggle. You can't help it, you do too. This was how America's anti-spitting campaign spread its message to the youngest citizens. Teachers turned germ theory into rhyme, manners into moral duty, and it worked. In classrooms across the country, from Boston to Kansas City, students were taught that a clean mouth meant a clean soul. The teacher holds up a colourful chart showing how disease travels through spit. It's a swirl of arrows and exaggerated faces coughing over each other. You never know whose germs you're sharing, she warns, her voice sharp enough to slice through the room's innocence. A little boy named Billy looks horrified, as though he's just learned he's been committing crimes in his sleep. Historians still debate whether these lessons were truly about health or about shaping obedience. Hygiene education often went hand in hand with civic conformity. The message wasn't just don't spit, it was don't cause trouble. Now class, the teacher continues, repeat after me, I will not spit, sneeze or cough without covering my mouth. The children chant in unison, voices rising like a hymn. You can't decide whether it's adorable or dystopian. She points to a poster of George Washington, stoic, spotless, heroic. Would our first president spit on the floor? She asks. The class gasps, horrified at the mere suggestion. Of course not, they cry. You lean back, thinking that if Washington had ever tried chewing tobacco, someone probably edited that part out of the history books. In the corner of the room, a small tin spittoon sits under a sign reading, "For emergencies only." The teacher catches you looking at it and smiles. We like to remind them of the old ways, she says quietly, as if talking about witchcraft. At recess, the children run outside singing a new hygiene song they learned from a visiting public health nurse. Don't spit on the street or you'll spread what you eat. Keep your mouth neat and your lungs will stay sweet. Catchy, sure, but you can't imagine it topping the jazz charts. You watch as one boy accidentally spits while laughing. The others gasp like he's dropped a live grenade. That's how people die, one shouts, pointing dramatically. The poor kid blushes crimson, rubbing the spot with his shoe. You feel a pang of sympathy and a little admiration for how deeply this message has sunk in. As the school bell rings, the teacher reminds them, good citizens keep their city clean, inside and out. The children nod solemnly before lining up to wash their hands, humming the hygiene song under their breath. Outside, you stand by the white picket fence, listening to their voices fade. There's something sweet, even touching, about the innocence of it all. In their small soap-scented world, the war against spit feels like a fight worth winning. And maybe you think it was. After all, every great social shift starts small, with one rule, one poster, one child who decides never to spit again. You're back on the streets, the afternoon sun gleaming off wet pavement freshly scrubbed by the sanitation crew. The city looks almost theatrical in its cleanliness, as if someone polished it just for you. But beneath that shine lies a peculiar truth. Not all punishments for spitting were as straightforward as a fine or a scolding. Some were far more creative. A crowd gathers near the courthouse steps, curious about today's spectacle. A young man stands sheepishly in front of the judge, hat in hand. His crime? Spitting outside a department store. His sentence? Community correction, the judge says with a grin. You'll spend your afternoon cleaning the very street you defiled. The courtroom bursts into laughter. You follow him outside as he's handed a bucket, soap and a stiff bristled brush. He kneels down, muttering under his breath, scrubbing the same square of sidewalk that bore his terrible offence. Passers-by glance his way, some amused, others disapproving. Shame was the new disinfectant, and it worked wonders. By the mid-1920s, American cities had started experimenting with what the papers called public corrective measures. If you couldn't afford the fine, you might have to wash windows at the police station, attend a health lecture, or listen to an hour-long sermon about germs. One repeat offender in Philadelphia was famously sentenced to sit through a medical film titled The Death Kiss of Tuberculosis. Reports say he fainted halfway through. Historians still debate whether these punishments were intended to educate or humiliate. Some city officials believed embarrassment was the surest cure for bad habits. Others thought it crossed a line, turning hygiene into theatre. In a nearby park, you see another offender standing beside a sign that reads, "I spit where I shouldn't have." It hangs around his neck like a sandwich board. Kids point and laugh. One woman clucks her tongue disapprovingly, whispering, "Serves him right." You feel a pang of pity, but also a strange admiration for the sheer absurdity of it all. Inside the city jail, guards reportedly told prisoners not to spit on the floor, or they'd be forced to mop every cell block. One inmate later joked, "I've mopped so much I can see my reflection in my regrets." That one's worth remembering. The punishments didn't stop there. Health departments issued hygiene probation cards, which offenders had to carry for 30 days, proving they were reformed. Some cities even required repeat violators to attend clean mouth clubs, where reformers demonstrated proper spitting alternatives, like carrying pocket handkerchiefs or swallowing discreetly. The irony is thick enough to mop with. As dusk settles, you stroll past a police precinct where officers are chuckling over their latest arrest. A travelling salesman fined $10 for spitting on the trolley. One officer says, "Guess he's not selling clean living." Another adds, "At least he left his mark." Punishments like these reveal something uniquely human. When laws fail to scare us, ridicule usually does the trick. The threat of becoming a public joke kept more mouths shut than any sign ever could. You pause by a lamppost where someone has scratched a small message into the metal base. Spit happens. You grin. Even in the most sanitized age, rebellion always finds a way to bubble up. You're in a small newsstand, the corner of Main and Broadway, the air thick with the smell of ink and the rustle of freshly printed papers. Headlines scream in block letters, "City cracks down on their spitters." Beneath it, a cartoon shows a man with his tongue hanging out, surrounded by skulls labelled germs. You flip through the pages and can't help but smile. America has officially declared war on saliva. The press loved the anti-spitting crusade. It was the perfect mix of settlements, morality and science. 3 things guaranteed to sell papers. Every week, some columnist would pen a moral tirade warning that those who spit on our sidewalks spit upon civilization itself. You can almost hear the typewriters clacking in righteous rhythm. One editorial from the New York Tribune called spitters the barbarians at the gates of progress. Another, in Chicago, dubbed them the city's unseen assassins. You imagine an editor shouting, "We need a villain," and a reporter replying, "How about mucus?" Historians still debate whether these exaggerated headlines helped or hurt the cause. They made people more aware, sure, but they also turned hygiene into mockery. By 1925, the term spit-shamer began to appear in satirical magazines, poking fun at reformers who scolded strangers for sneezing without warning. Still, newspapers loved a good hero story too. The spit patrols became local legends. Articles described brave health officers chasing down offenders through crowded markets, armed with notebooks and moral indignation. One woman, Mrs. Clara Price, an article boasts, single-handedly reported 12 spitters in a single day. You can almost hear the applause and the groans. But perhaps the most brutal punishments came not from police, but from the court of public opinion. A man caught spitting on a trolley might find his name printed in the paper under public nuisances of the week. Businesses blacklisted habitual offenders, and some employers even fired workers for unsanitary conduct. You pause to watch a newsboy shouting, "Read all about it! Germ fiends fined!" He can't be more than 12, yet he's parroting the new civic religion with perfect fervour. "Don't be a spitter, mister," he calls out. You tip your hat. The city has its new chorus boy. Inside a nearby barbershop, men flip through papers and scoff at the hysteria. "You'd think spitting was murder," one says. The barber nods but lowers his voice. "Careful. You never know who's listening." He glances toward a woman outside, clipboard in hand, jotting notes as she watches the street. Maybe she's a health inspector, or maybe just nosy. In this era, both wore the same expression. The ridicule works both ways. Cartoons soon appear mocking overzealous reformers, women in wide hats wielding mops like swords, chasing men down the street. One popular comic strip, Saliva Sally, portrays a fictional activist who finds her own husband for unholy expectoration. The public eats it up. Reformers laugh along in public, but privately they seethe. It's the eternal American loop. We crusade, we exaggerate, and then we turn our crusades into comedy. Still, beneath the jokes and caricatures, the message sticks. The more people laugh about spitting, the fewer dare to do it. You can't buy that kind of behavioural change. It's social pressure in its purest form. By sunset, the newspaper racks are nearly empty, their headlines already half forgotten. Tomorrow there'll be new scandals, bootleggers, jazz dancers, the latest flapper fashion. But for now, saliva is front-page news. You fold the paper under your arm and step into the cooling air, the faint scent of ink lingering like gossip. It's late afternoon now, and the streets hum with the usual rhythm, car horns, the clang of streetcars, and the chatter of people who've grown tired of being told what not to do. You can feel it, the tide of resistance. The city is spotless, the air crisp with disinfectant, but not everyone's buying into the gospel of cleanliness anymore. A man at the corner newsstand mutters, "They can fine me all they want. I'll spit where I please." His voice is low but defiant, and a few others nod in quiet agreement. You catch the glimmer of a small rebellion taking shape. Tired citizens mocking the so-called hygiene police. The anti-spitting laws, once symbols of civic virtue, are starting to feel oppressive. The novelty has worn off and people are beginning to push back. In letters to the editor, locals complain about being watched, lectured and fined for what used to be second nature. One letter you read begins, "If the city cared half as much about the rats in my tenement as it does about my saliva, we'd all live longer." You can almost hear the frustration crackle off the page. Historians still debate whether this backlash marked the beginning of the end for the anti-spitting crusade, or just a cultural sigh, a weariness of constant correction. Either way, the ridicule starts to sting. The term spit tyrants makes the rounds, used to describe overzealous inspectors and self-appointed moral guardians. You pass a cafe where a group of factory workers sits on the stoop during their break. They're laughing over a crude drawing, an officer chasing a drop of spit with a mop. "Put that in the papers," one of them says. Another adds, "Maybe they'll fine the rain next." Even politicians start making jokes about it. A mayor in Ohio reportedly said during a campaign speech, "We'll clean the streets, but let's not mop up our freedoms." The crowd roared he won by a landslide. The truth is, people were exhausted. They'd survived the influenza pandemic, endured prohibition, and now felt strangled by endless rules about behaviour. A little spit, they argued, wasn't the apocalypse. It was humanity. But the reformers didn't back down easily. The American Public Health Association doubled down with new slogans. Clean streets, clean conscience. Cities installed even more signs, but you can sense the tone shifting from conviction to desperation. When people stop fearing fines, fear-based campaigns lose their bite. That night, as you walk home through the dim alleys, you hear a man coughing behind you. He spits, quickly, quietly, then looks around as if expecting a spotlight to hit him, uncomes. He grins, relieved, and disappears into the crowd. You can't help smiling too. Somewhere along the way, this grand experiment in enforced purity turned into a cat-and-mouse game between citizens and the state. Reformers may have won the early battles, but the city's spirit, the messy, irreverent human part of it, isn't going down without a fight. As a trolley rumbles past, you notice the once pristine no spitting sign above the stop has started to rust at the edges. A small streak of mud splashes its bottom half. You swear it looks like the city itself is exhaling. Tired, defiant, and maybe just a little relieved to be dirty again. You wake to a city that feels quieter now. Not silent. Cities never are. But subdued, like the hum of a record spinning just before the needle lifts. It's the late 1920s, and America has started moving on. The roaring decade rolls toward its end, and the spit patrols, once so proud and vigilant, are fading into memory. You walk down Main Street, noticing how the enamel "no spitting" signs have gone dull, their white letters chipped at the corners. A few hang crooked, forgotten by the very people who once trembled at their authority. The city has bigger things to worry about now: stock markets, jazz clubs, bootleg raids, and the ever-present whisper of modernity. Historians still debate exactly when the anti-spitting craze began to lose steam. Some point to 1926, when enforcement budgets were quietly cut in many cities. Others argue it was the inevitable burnout of any moral campaign. People get tired of being told they're dirty. Either way, by the time talkies replaced silent films, no one wanted to hear another lecture about saliva. You pass a police officer leaning against a lamppost reading a paper. He doesn't glance up as a man nearby spits discreetly into the gutter. Once upon a time, that might have earned a ticket. Now, it barely earns a shrug. You can feel the shift in the air, law giving way to custom, fear dissolving into routine. The anti-spitting patrols themselves became the stuff of jokes. Old-timers in taverns told stories about Spit Sergeant Sam, who used to measure droplet distances with a ruler. Kids laughed at the absurdity, not realizing how serious it once was. Imagine, they'd say, getting arrested for what everyone's doing anyway. But not everyone mourned the decline. Reformers who'd dedicated years to the cause worried their hard work would vanish like so much disinfectant mist. Some doubled down, turning their energy toward the broader public health efforts: clean milk, vaccination drives, sanitation infrastructure. Others retired, muttering that civilization had taken a step backward. A former clean street officer, now working as a janitor at City Hall, tells you, "We cleaned up the sidewalks, sure, but people's minds? Not so easy." He shrugs and pushes his mop along, whistling softly. The sound echoes in the empty corridor. And yet, you can see how their legacy remains, even in the fading light. Spitting may no longer be a criminal offence, but habits have changed. Most people wouldn't dream of doing it in public anymore. It's not fear that stops them now, it's reflex. That's how culture works. Rules turn into manners, and manners into instinct. As evening falls, you walk past the old courthouse steps, where once a young man was forced to scrub his own shame away. The stone is worn smooth now, polished by time rather than soap. You stop, running your fingers across the surface. There's no plaque, no sign, no reminder of the absurd moral theatre that played out here. Only the quiet hum of a city that has learned, however imperfectly, to keep its mouth closed. You smile to yourself. Maybe progress isn't about perfection. It's about what sticks after the noise fades. The streets feel softer now, the sharp edges of the crusade worn smooth by time. You walk past a row of storefronts glowing with the electric light, their window displays showing shiny new contraptions, vacuum cleaners, radios, refrigerators. Cleanliness is still fashionable, but it's not militant anymore. It's domestic, commercial, and pleasantly ordinary. A newspaper flutters by your feet. You stoop to pick it up, half expecting another bold headline about public hygiene menace. Instead, you find an ad for toothpaste. Bright smiles, clean lives, America's new habit. It hits you then. What began as fear has turned into lifestyle. The war on spit evolved into the cult of cleanliness. By now, the anti-spitting patrols are ghosts. Most cities stopped funding enforcement altogether. The signs rust quietly, the fines forgotten, but their spirit lingers in every shining window and scrubbed floor. The public didn't reject the idea, they simply absorbed it. What was once shouted by reformers is now whispered by advertisements. Historians still debate whether this transition marks victory or surrender. Did America become healthier, or just better at hiding its mess? Maybe both. Public health officers now talk about education instead of enforcement. Instead of ticket books, they carry pamphlets on brushing teeth and covering coughs. Instead of court orders, they use posters showing smiling families, white shirts, clean hands, sparkling homes. You pause in front of a drugstore display filled with soap bars and antiseptic sprays. A sign above reads, "Modern life demands modern cleanliness." It's not about spitting anymore, it's about everything. The human body has become a frontier to conquer, one germ at a time. A man beside you laughs as he reads the slogan. "Guess even the germs have to pay rent now," he jokes. You grin. It's a good line. The tension of the old campaign is gone, replaced by the easy rhythm of marketing. Where once you were told what not to do, now you're told what to buy instead. Progress with a price tag. Down the street, a group of children skip rope singing a rhyme that sounds vaguely familiar. Don't spit, don't cough, keep the city clean, wash your hands and eat your greens. You smile, realizing that even if the law has faded, the lessons remain, passed from classrooms to playgrounds, then woven into culture. The Crusade's fire may have burned out, but its warmth lingers. As dusk deepens, you find yourself standing under one of the last no spitting plaques still clinging to a lamppost. The letters are faint now, the enamel cracked, but it's there, a relic of a time when America thought it could legislate its way to purity. You trace the edge of the metal with your finger, feeling its roughness. It's oddly comforting, this mix of moral ambition and human imperfection. Maybe that's the true legacy of the anti-spitting age, not spotless streets or sanitized habits, but the enduring belief that even the smallest actions matter. That civilization is a daily decision, made in coughs held back, in sidewalks left clean, in the quiet awareness that what leaves your mouth might ripple far beyond your breath. It's past midnight now. The city sleeps, its electric pulse dimmed to a quiet hum beneath the moon. You find yourself once again at the corner where it all began, the same stretch of sidewalk, the same faint gleam on the wet stone. Only this time the air feels lighter. No inspectors, no lectures, no signs barking orders from the lampposts. Just the gentle rhythm of a street that has learned to breathe again. You take a slow walk, the pavement echoing softly under your shoes. The buildings loom tall and silent, their bricks washed clean by decades of rain and reform. You realise that the Crusade, for all its moral noise, wasn't really about spit at all. It was about control, about what it means to live together, without infecting each other, literally or metaphorically. Every no-spitting sign was really a whisper saying, behave yourself, someone's watching. And maybe that's what civilization is, a constant negotiation between freedom and courtesy, between what you want to do and what's polite to leave unsaid or unspat. Historians still debate whether the anti-spitting movement actually saved lives. Some argue the real victory was psychological. It taught Americans to see the body as a shared space, not just a private one. Others think it was just one more moral fad born of fear and forgotten in comfort. Both might be right. You stop under a flickering lamp, the light pools around your shoes, and for a moment you picture those old reformers marching with banners, shouting about germs and decency. You picture the men in saloons, laughing into spittoons, and the school children chanting songs about clean mouths. All of them gone now, but in a way, still here. Their lessons linger, invisible as breath on a cold night. Somewhere, a cat darts across the street, tail flashing like a shadow. The world has changed so much since those laws were written. We no longer hang signs for every habit we want to end. We post hashtags, health tips, polite reminders that echo the same message in softer tones. Cover your mouth. Wash your hands. Stay kind. You glance down at the pavement, perfectly still beneath the lamplight. The wars of spit and shame are long over, but they left behind something useful, a quiet, civilized awareness that what leaves your lips can change, more than just your own small world. And as the clock tower tolls one, the sound rolling gently through the empty streets, you smile. The city, for all its chaos, found its rhythm after all. It learned to clean itself without scrubbing out its soul. You breathe in, slow and steady, feeling the cool night settle on your skin. The ghosts of reformers and rebels fade into the quiet. The street is clean. The story is done. The city sleeps, and so should you. Let the sound of the trolley bells fade in your imagination. The smell of wet pavement linger just long enough to remind you that history is never as neat as it looks on paper. We try to wash it, polish it, disinfect it, but it always leaves a trace. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's what makes it human. You've walked through a time when fear and progress danced together awkwardly, when science met superstition on the same cobblestone street. You've seen how a single droplet of spit could spark a movement, how rules meant to keep people safe can just as easily make them small, and how eventually every crusade has to learn to exhale. So tonight, as you sink back into your pillow, remember, the things that seem trivial, the sneeze you cover, the sidewalk you avoid dirtying, once stood at the heart of civilization's long argument with itself. Cleanliness, courtesy, control, they're just different words for how we try to live without hurting each other. Let that thought drift like a quiet breeze across your mind. Picture the lamplight glowing faintly against the rain-slick street. Listen for the ghostly echo of a voice saying, "Don't spit, be kind." It's old advice, but maybe it still fits. Now close your eyes, the city's clean, the story's told. Good night.